Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me for the first time ever on the show from the Seattle Overload podcast and Seahawks on Tape Substack, Matty F Brown, my favorite Seattle follow on Twitter, largely because Seattle people are often dealing with a lot of emotional things with that Seahawks team on Twitter. So usually grind the tape, but one of my favorite analysts out there. Matty, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
I'm excited. Thanks so much for having me. I know it's the first time I've been on the podcast, but you've been a great help to me in the past when it comes to Substack and things like that. And I know you're doing amazing stuff when it comes to Minnesota coverage. So hopefully I can fit the bill when it comes to Seahawks stuff. We've got a lot to talk about, and I'm really excited for this matchup.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I've loved how you've grown your brand out with the Seattle coverage. And so we need to talk about this because all other Seattle matchups that we've had with the Vikings have always been the Russell Wilson era, the Pete Carroll era. And it got pretty weird during that time with the Mike Zimmer, Pete Carroll going at it. But now this is very different. We got younger coaches. They're more attractive. They're more modern. And Geno Smith is now the quarterback. He's a little banged up in this game, but I want to know from you about the Geno Smith experience because every time I watch, my eyes are either blowing out of my head because he makes some insane throw that I can't believe, or mind exploding because he makes some insane throw that I can't believe. Right. So explain to me what it has been like to follow along the roller coaster of Geno Smith.
Well, I think he is one of those like classic pocket passers, and he is an expert at kind of navigating his round a pocket and being a drop back passer, and he does some really good things. But as we all know, if you're a pocket passer and your offensive line and your pass protection is struggling, that's when even the best guys' mistakes will creep into their game. I think Geno's guilty at times of trying to press too hard. I don't know what it is after this last week, but I think he was eighth in turnover, where the throw percentage, like eighth best. So he wasn't necessarily, I mean, that depends who's charting that, but it's not necessarily bad. But I think the more his environment around him has become shaky, his play inevitably has become shaky too. But you just have to look at the type of offense they're trying to run to see how much, what their opinion of him is. When they traded for Sam Howell in the offseason, there was some talk about new regime. Maybe they have a competition. Maybe they're not that high on Geno, but clearly, like that, they place a lot on his shoulders. They're really kind of doing everything they can in terms of like a passing from, passing offense in general. So whether that's too much, whether they have the offensive line to be able to do those types of things, and if that's helped Geno moving forward, I would, you could have some concerns over that. And like you say, there's been a couple. I mean, he's always been a shooter. He'll always throw tight window stuff and bet on his arm and bet on his intelligence in reading out concepts. But I think maybe there's like one or two throws I can think of where I'm like, yeah, that's a turnover worthy throw. Like that's not a good decision. That's uncharacteristic. That's forcing it when you didn't need to.
The offensive line part, I was just
Mm.
looking at the snap counts from Seattle's offensive line, and a lot of names on that list for this year
Uh-huh.
for the offensive line. Where does it stand right now? Because this to me is really on both sides, and we'll get into the defense, but the matchup I think is going to be determined on whether Seattle can handle everything that Brian Flores is throwing at that offensive line. And let me tell you, it's going to be a lot. There's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different looks. They are going to force Seattle to pass things off, to communicate, to deal with all sorts of rush looks. And from what I saw against the Packers, there might be some troubles there.
Oh yeah. So right now, and this is at the time of recording, and I also haven't seen today's injury report out of practice. But right now, I think at right tackle they've got Abraham Lucas back, who's the guy that they feel quite high about. He had like off-season knee surgery. That's exciting. But then at right guard, they've got a 6th-round pick in rookie in Sautea Laumea, who is he's kind of struggling like a rookie 6th-round pick would look like, I think. And also he was more of a tackle in college, so he's kind of dealing with the whole convert there thing. Center, they had Connor Williams, who retired. That's a name people are probably familiar with from his days in Miami. And now then they had Olu Oluwatimi, who was a second-year player, was the best college football center. And then he's hurt his knee. So now it's a 3rd-string center in a guy called Jalen Sundell, who he came into the game last week and looked okay, looked very athletic, getting out in space and pulling. But in terms of, you're talking about Brian Flores and what he can dial up, all those twists, the amount of stuff he's going to throw at a 3rd-string rookie center, that's a lot on a guy's plate. So, yeah, it's the right side and the center spot is where I think teams have had success. But like Laken Tomlinson is, a left guard. He's like an every, like a maybe slightly below solid vet. His best skill is his availability, but John Schneider perhaps infamously said in the offseason that guards get overdrafted and overpaid, and he then let Damian Lewis, who'd been pretty solid as a left guard, walk. He did get very highly paid by Carolina, but like if you compare Carolina's interior offensive line to Seattle's, there's a reason that they get overdrafted and overpaid. And Schneider knows that, but the comment is aging poorly given how the pass protection is playing out, even the run blocking. I'd also like to say, like, and I'm sure you're going to get onto this, but the offensive line is being put in pretty poor situations by a variety of aspects, but like, that if your offensive line isn't the type, I mean, no offensive line in the NFL can drop back as much as Ryan Grubbs asked the new offensive coordinator who was with the Washington Huskies, how much he's asked them to do this season. And there's a lot of things you can get into about just like run pass balance being off, but also his overall like play calling, like types, like the buckets of plays, be it like a deeper drop back, a short drop back, the play action, shotgun, or formational balance stuff as well, where that's way out of whack. So I don't think the offensive line's as bad as they've been perhaps made to look either. But all of this means I look at this from Brian Flores and I see what Minnesota's doing on defense. I'm like, this is a dream matchup for Brian Flores. I think this could get very, very ugly. And that's all forgetting that Geno Smith hurt his knee and they don't really, he's a full participant in practice, but no one actually knows what he hurt in terms of his knee. Like he just hurt his knee. So his mobility might be limited. He's very good at moving around the pocket, but it's another factor to all of this. So I think it could be a good one for Minnesota.
Yeah, the 3rd-string center element is going to be big because the Vikings do so much up the middle. And if you look back at the Chicago game, I just posted my film look at that. And the number of times that they have Blake Cashman coming up the middle, Jamin Davis, who they added, that's kind of his job, is to come in and just rush straight up the middle. But they do a lot of really creative stuff. Something that I noticed was early in the season, they were having Blake Cashman line up over the middle, kind of A gap, but then rush outside and hit the tackle, swing the outside linebacker back inside. But then last week they faked that. So Cashman starts to go toward the tackle, then turns around and loops around, and the Bears are looking around, go, wait a minute, where did the middle linebacker go? There's so much creativity that goes into the rush plan up the middle. Josh Metellus is part of this as well, where you never really know where he's going to line up and where he could come from. This is going to be a huge challenge for them. And if Geno can't move in the pocket as well, that's kind of sitting duck situation. There is a solution, though, from what we've seen to facing the Vikings blitz plans, and that is the quarterback throwing the ball real quick, getting it out of his hands and into the hands of the receivers. This worked for Detroit. This worked for the Los Angeles Rams. And if Kirk Cousins hadn't thrown 2 horrendous interceptions, it was actually working for Kirk Cousins as well. Middle of the field, getting rid of the ball quickly. Does Seattle do this? Can Seattle do this? Because I think that they're always hunting big plays. for Geno Smith makes sense because he's got a cannon. But if he can get rid of the ball quickly and execute underneath stuff, there is spaces that are left by this Vikings defense when they're sending extra rushers. Friends, gifting is hard, but here's a hint. Give the gift of connection from US Cellular. Not sure what that means? Here's a slightly more specific hint. You could choose 4 free phones and get 4 lines for $90 a month from US Cellular. Your family wants new phones? How do we know? They told us. The good news is that compared to wrapping presents, you're great at taking hints. So take a hint and get 4 free phones and 4 lines for $90 a month. US Cellular, built for us.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba's really emerged. Like heading into the season, the second year first rounder out of Ohio State. There's a question over how is he going to get the football when you've got like the two historically target dominant players in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And what's actually ended up happening is Lockett's kind of dipped off and JSN's emerged. There's like a real kind of almost like a number 1.5 in the offense. Like he's getting there to being like, I mean, if you look at his production, he's been the number one receiver over the last 5 or so weeks, and he is a guy who can go over the middle and is very agile and can separate there. But honestly, the offense has very clear formation tendencies, receiver split tendencies, and it's the type of stuff where when I watch the Vikings and I know like I'm familiar with Shaquille Griffin, obviously, because he started his career in Seattle. But I look at like the Vikings defensive back room, and ordinarily, if this was a more kind of balanced offense and they had more variety and they mixed things up better, I'd feel pretty good about Seattle's receiver group going up against the Vikings. But with how they're constructed right now, like I know it's from an outside perspective, you'd think, yeah, they are kind of hunting the deep play, but their explosive play rate this season's way down. They've really struggled to get the ball deep down the field. Metcalf's struggling. I think he's a bit banged up as well. But it's yeah, like I said, I think this is one where if they do stuff like a lot of stuff against the Vikings defense, I'd be pretty shocked. One thing that has emerged the last, well, I can't really say the last game because they barely ran the football despite it, and they were playing from 2 scores down, but they barely ran the football. But they were still successful-ish when they did it, and then the 2 weeks prior was in the run game, pulling people, running like gap scheme, putting like a center and a guard or the backside guard and the tackle round, and letting Zach Charbonnet, who's become a part of the offense, a bigger part of the offense with Ken Walker dealing with an injury. That's been a thing. And then the week before that against the Jets, they ran duo, so like a power concept without the puller, like another gap scheme concept. And they're having great success with that. So I'd be interested. Like, I actually think one of the more underrated things about Flores, like watching from afar and like really admiring the Vikings defense, is how well constructed the run defense is. Like, just from schematic sound standpoint, how they get into those like 6-2 fronts, and like the ability to use guys like Metellus and show like too high and spin him down as though he's like the weak side inside backer. And they're just so stout up front. Like the types of players they have, unsung names who, I mean, I'm blanking on their names right now, but that kind of is my point, that they're not the flashiest necessarily players, but everyone's doing their job, everyone's being disciplined. And I love Greenard on the edge. The way he can set an edge is, again, I think very underrated. So I again would like to see Seattle be able to have some success in the run game, then show that they have layers off that. But I am not too confident. And again, looking at Minnesota and how O'Connell, he has a fairly high pass rate each year, right? But if you look at how he blends his run action into a lot of his passing game concepts, that is like they're playing a different sport to what Seattle's doing on offense right now. I am envious, but again, at least we'll see it from one side.
You did sound a little jealous there. I saw
bit, yeah.
some kind of little stars in your eyes about
Right.
O'Connell. A couple of different things there. Are you suggesting Jonathan Bullard is not a household name? Jonathan Bullard, Jerry Tillery, Jalen Redmond, Harrison Phillips, but truly the most underrated position group because they don't have stars, and those guys' jobs are not to get pressure. This is kind of an old school 3-4 type of deal that Bill Belichick would use, where they move bodies so other people can have lanes to go after the quarterback or blow up run plays in the backfield. And a lot of it is just not being moved is really the key, or not allowing the guy to get the reach block, or just, hey, I'm going to take you over here and the other guy's going to take somebody over there. And then here's Blake Cashman running in, and the only guy who's there is maybe a running back who he just runs over. It's really clever the way that they use those defensive tackles / traditional 3-4 defensive ends. And I think it's also a little bit money saving too, because you don't have to spend $20 million a year on a Jonathan Bullard, but the guy's out there playing 700 snaps.
Right.
So that's clever. When teams have run against them, they've had a lot more success. So there is that part of it as well. I mean, that goes for anything. If you're in 2nd and 4, it's much easier than 2nd and 8. But there aren't a lot of teams that have really run successfully against this Vikings defense because of those guys and because of the tacklers that they have. But I did want to circle back to your point about Kevin O'Connell versus the Seattle offense, because you have to really ask somebody who studies the film to get the details. But I remember Sauce Gardner talking about facing Kevin O'Connell and talking about how so many things look similar and then break differently, that it's very hard to anticipate where guys are going to go based on tendencies. And what you described to me sounded like what college offenses are. Like, they can be clever, but a lot of times they have to be a little limited because of just the players you're dealing with and the time that you're dealing with. So it becomes, Cliff Kingsbury's had this problem as well, where the tendencies as a season goes along, they end up getting figured out. And if you're giving Brian Flores any hints to the game plan, it's going to be a problem. I want to throw this stat out at you. This really popped to me. Geno Smith, when he's got a clean pocket this year, has a 91 PFF grade, 105 quarterback rating. Geno Smith under pressure, which is almost 40% of the time, 57 quarterback rating, 5 touchdowns, 11 picks, which I know is not the best metric, but there is a massive gulf between Geno Smith when he's been pressured and when he's had an opportunity to throw the ball.
And what's crazy about that is last season, Geno under pressure, there was like half of a season where he was actually performing better under pressure than he was without pressure. A big part of the offense is on plays where pressured. It sounds obvious, but for whatever reason, but lots of things go into this, but guys aren't open when he's pressured, so then the ball doesn't come out. Like, I think why Geno is such a almost like a hipster quarterback. Like, he's a big a lot of people who watch the tape, and I think nationally, as more people have tuned into Seattle and got more familiar with their issues and their strengths and everything. But I think a lot of the reason people like him is he plays quarterback in like a very logical way. Like, for someone sitting in like a dark film room watching all 22 while, I don't know, eating a bag of cheese puffs or whatever. I've never done that, but you're watching it through and you're pausing at each point. You go, he's reading here and he's reading here and he's reading here and he's reading here, and he's playing within the structure and the timing and the available pocket he has. Why I think it's been so bad this year is guys haven't been open, route distribution's been poor, and they've had so many issues that, well, if you're pressured, are you just going to keep taking the sack? Are you going to try and force things? I don't think Geno's done that as much as maybe some people would say, but it has started to creep into the game, as you spoke about at the start. And it's a pretty depressing. It's a depressing watch right now, and I don't see really. It feels too late. Like, they came in. It's a great point you made about Cliff Kingsbury. I hadn't thought of it like that, but I do think it's the similar kind of issues are happening. Like, they came in passing loads. Then I imagine during the bye week, and Mike McDonald probably said, hey, we probably need to up our run rate now because teams have figured out that we're just doing shotgun, drop back, you've kind of pushed that to the limit. We probably need to flesh out other aspects of the offense a bit more, like, and it's all very kind of half baked. Like play action, for instance, from under center, they only ever fake to the weak side, yet they never run to the weak side. So their play action is a very obvious tell to the linebackers that, hey, the mesh with the running back is weak. Also, to protect it, because the offensive line was struggling, kind of selling run and staying kind of low, they show very big hi hats, which again, that's not really going to get guys biting. So oftentimes, Gino will be at the bottom of his drop in play action, and these will be plays where he will end up getting pressured, most likely. He'll hit his back foot, he'll start to hitch up, and no one is open, and the linebacker hasn't even come downhill. The second level hasn't come downhill. They're all underneath the roots, and it's just really poor. So I'm very negative on this Seattle offense. I think at this point I've seen enough. At the start of the year, I likened it to, it's like if you're a kid and you're told, hey, you can't have chocolate cake until you eat your vegetables, maybe have some bread and butter, like do all those good things. And Ryan Grubb's just like, no, I'm just gonna have chocolate cake. And he's having chocolate cake like every day, like 5 days a week, 5 times a day. Like it's like, no, stop eating the chocolate cake. We need to have some nourishment here. Like we need to tie things together. Heck, let's have a anyway. I've taken that analogy far enough, but yeah, it's bad.
I like that. I like that a lot. That threw me off. I had this statistic all ready to throw at you, and then the chocolate cake thing got me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But they only run play action 16% of the time and average 6.5 yards per attempt on play action. And just to put that in context, let me quickly let me pull up Sam Darnold in play action. And
this is gonna make me sad. The way, like I said,
angry.
the way the Vikings tie all that in, it's just a thing of beauty. Like objectively, like loving football and like loving, cool design and cool play calling. It's yeah, I really admire what KOC is able to do compared to and it's always. To appreciate certain things, you have to see the other side of it, because Gino has been a very effective play action quarterback prior to this season. Like he's very good at it. And just think, that's one whole section of plays that you're not good at, and when you have been good at it, there's other things like that too. But to have an effective offense, you can't just suddenly get bad at one thing you were good at, because then that's a whole chunk you're missing. Yeah, and it's something which is on Mike McDonald's mind. Like his press conference on Monday, he was asked about if you need to run the ball effectively in order for play action pass to work, despite there being some data which may or may not suggest a relationship, even though there obviously is one. I just don't think they've found it yet, but at least analytically. But anyway, he said, I stand on both sides of the argument. I think it's more based on the sets and the protections and the situations that dictate what defenses can do in some of those situations. We have a good play action pass game, probably should see more of it, frankly. To a certain extent, the effectiveness of your run game affects play action game, especially if you get it really going. But those are good plays. And I think for me, when he mentioned sets, protections, and situations, that's all the things I've just spoke about. So he sees it. And yeah, I think the Ryan Grubb hire was very ambitious. Like he spoke about wanting to be a physical offense. He spoke about wanting to, have that identity on offense. Now, no one's going to come out and say, "Hey, we want to be soft as whatever." But at the same time, when you think physically, he's going to run the ball. It's going to be like the Harbors who he learned under. It's going to be Greg Roman. We're going to get heavy personnel. We're going to pound the rock. Then they hire Ryan Grubb, which that isn't immediately what comes to mind, but you're like, Washington, he very much maximized the talent he had there. He had Penix, he had those great trio of receivers. He did a really good job. So, okay, this is very ambitious. What an interesting blend. How's it going to play out? And it's not playing out. It's really struggling.
This is where Kevin O'Connell, coming from his full coaching background in the NFL, and he starts with a Shanahan team in Washington, and then he goes to the McVay, and what these guys understand is how to each week make it all look the same and then suddenly make it all look different. And to circle back to those play action stats. So remember, Seattle's only running them 16% of the time and averaging 6.5 yards per pass attempt. That's not even including the sacks that Geno has taken. The Vikings are running it 28% of the time for 11 yards per pass attempt with Sam
Nice.
Darnold. 14 of his touchdowns have come on play action. And all these coaches always say, well, I just want my quarterback to be able to play point guard out there and then make a couple special plays a game. Well, play action is the most point guard thing that they can do, which is usually the reads are kind of there for you. And it does draw defenders, regardless of how much the run game impacts it or not. Which is an interesting discussion. I feel like coaches get asked about this all the time. And it's like, did you see that study a long time ago? And the thing is that just because, and this goes for medical science and all other fields of research, just because we don't have the numbers at this moment to show something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The play action game is different when you have Aaron Jones from when they had Alexander Madison, because you have to respect Aaron Jones. We saw the Vikings throw a touchdown on play action last week where Kevin Byard, the safety for the Bears, was like staring at Aaron Jones and then like, oh, wait, I was supposed to be back there, because Jones had 2 explosive runs on a particular drive. So maybe on a macro level, over 32 teams, over 1,000 plays each, it's hard to pinpoint. But in a given game plan, given play caller, the best probably make that work. And there was another thing just to add to that PFF looked at a while ago with some of their data researchers about linebackers moving and the next gen stats and how the linebackers came forward first before dropping back and how often that happened. And, just it's clear that you can make space with those plays. And the Seahawks are not using them. Straight drop back team sounds like a feast for Brian Flores. But let's go over to the other side of the football. Here's what's crazy to me. I look at all every game. I'm going to look at the other teams' PFF grades and see, all right, who's playing, who's getting snaps, what does it say about them, who's getting pressures, data. When I look at all the grades and the data, it all looks pretty darn good for Seattle's defense. And then I go to the results, the yards against, the points against, and I'm like, it's not terrible, but it's also not as good as you would expect. When you look at this D-line and you look at Leonard Williams' production, Boye Mafe, who everybody here knows very well, Draymond Jones is a good player. I mean, there's dudes putting up a lot of pressure. There's cornerbacks who everybody knows. Why isn't it better?
That's a good point, because I think to understand, I am a bit of a historian, and like to understand where the defense has improved in the season, you have to go to like a pivotal moment, which is their decision to having let Jordan Brooks walk, who's playing very well in a very similar defense in Miami, like Mike McDonald obviously running like the thing that he did in Baltimore, and there being like a spread of that, proliferation of that league wide. They let Jordan Brooks walk. They let Bobby Wagner walk, who was an all-pro. Whether you agree with that or not, I don't, but they let him walk. And they signed Tyrell Dodson from Buffalo and Jerome Baker from Miami. And both those guys are no longer the starting linebackers. Both those guys are no longer with the football team. So that shows you how well that decision played out. And they were really struggling in that first half of the season to play together. Like the first level and the second level were very disjointed in their run defense. So they weren't able to stop the run, like how the Vikings stopped the run to have fun, right? And get into all those creative Flores looks. McDonald, obviously, that's where he really makes his money, is the stress he puts on a quarterback in those clear passing situations. But they weren't able to stop the run. You were having all these. I was thinking about how the second half of the season, Baltimore in 2023 went from a top 5 run defense via any metric to like 30th or worse. Like, and it's like, oh my God, is Mike McDonald got a real problem with, like, he doesn't know how to make a run defense? Is it just defense being streaky? Anyway, then he goes and trades for Ernest Jones just for a 4th round pick, who was playing for Titans defense that at the time was like a top 5 unit, which feels a long time ago now, but they were playing really good football. And then rookie Tyrese Knight, a 4th-round pick, he comes in out of UTEP and he's playing. So now they've got 2 different linebackers, and lo and behold, now the front line and the D line, who are very talented in terms of like Leonard Williams, who's played almost like an all-pro, which sounds lofty, but he's played very, very good football, particularly like the last 5 weeks or so. And Jaron Reed's like a really solid, savvy vet. They've got a 1st-round pick in Byron Murphy. He gets on the field, but not as much as you might think, given how well those guys are playing. They're playing with more confidence. They're really resetting the line of scrimmage, and they're defending the run really well. The second level behind kind of tweaked. McDonald against the Bills had a really, in my opinion, poor game in terms of the alignment he was putting them in for the run defense. I think there were some communication things going on there. It was Ernest Jones's first game. That's since been addressed. So everything was looking great. And you're like, wow, this defense is awesome. Then the Packers game happens, which was like the opportunity to prove that this was a leading NFC team because they were on a big win streak. They'd have gone 2 games clear, I think, in the NFC West. Maybe just 1 game. Probably 2 games.
Is it 1? Is it 2? Well, let me look.
I don't know. Anyway, they'd have established themselves on a national stage, and the Packers kind of had their way, particularly in the first half. The defense solidified in the second half. If you look at the first half, there's a lot of communication, probably trying to do a bit too much. Guys like not set at the snap, talking to one another, trying to like tweak the D-line alignment, all that type of stuff. And it was a mess, to be frank. It was a mess. So what then you think of is, well, actually, if they're number one, they were, I don't know how the previous game has impacted them, but before that game, they were number 1 since week 9 in defensive EPA per play, right? So they were cooking. And then that game happened, and then you think, hang on, though, they did have 2 pick sixes, and they were kind of defending short fields and getting stops. But in terms of like the non-turnover plays, the non-takeaway plays, which those happen, so you can be very happy about that. But if you remove those plays, they actually do give up kind of chunks through games, and they've been put in horrid spots by special team snafus. And they've got a new returner now, so that may not be an issue anymore, but also poor offensive play. But the Packers game, it just reminds me of, if you look at Kyle Shanahan versus Mike Macdonald, everyone in Seattle rightly gets excited about Macdonald being a Kyle Shanahan killer, so to speak. Obviously, the 49ers having a down year, but what he did, that was kind of the coming out party for the Ravens last year when they caused Brock Purdy so many issues. I think that was a primetime game. Anyway, but if you remove the non-takeaway plays in that instance as well, Shanahan has very good efficiency per play against McDonald. You look at what LaFleur was able to do the first time those 2 guys had played each other. He did some really nasty stuff. O'Connell's never played McDonald before, has he?
Don't
that would be
think
interesting.
So did the Vikings play the Ravens?
Mm.
Not with O'Connell. I think the last time they played the Ravens was 2021 with Zimmer.
Right. So, yeah. So there you go. So I'm really, really interested into one. It's obviously not the same offense, but there are similarities between how the Packers and the Vikings move the football. I'm actually, you'll like your listeners, and you will probably like to hear this, but I actually would be more frightened of Minnesota's offense right now. I think particularly with just how they move the football, I think is going to be a big problem for the Seahawks. And yeah, this is what I want to see from the defense. Like, are they able to, maybe give up a few less chunks, or are they able to get those takeaways? Because the takeaways against Green Bay didn't happen. And so the big chunks were happening. They were down in a hole early on. And I honestly feel, yeah, they did improve in the second half, but the Packers kind of went into, let's just grind the game out now. We don't need to get in our bag so much. But they came with 15 plays, like a lot of NFL offenses do. This is something Bobby Wagner spoke about before, and Ernest Jones, the new Seahawks linebacker, spoke about after this past game, the Sunday Night Football game. The NFL offenses each week will come with like 15 new plays, which they'll throw out there at the start, and they're often problem plays, which they've studied on tape, have caused defense issues. But they're also like the Packers were using different types of motion that they hadn't shown before in the past, like 4-game sample size. So obviously Minnesota will do the same, because then if every NFL offense does stuff like that. And how how the Seahawks adapt to that's going to be really interesting, and I want to see them tested in this way. I think just matchup wise, I'm fascinated to see whether Reek Woolen, who had a poor game last week, is kind of up and down. Sometimes it almost comes off like a concentration thing. Like, he's so talented, he's so tall and long and fast, and if you thought of like, hey, let's create a cornerback on Madden, that would be the guy. That when he gets beat, it's almost startling because you're like, what? But does he shadow Justin Jefferson? You spoke about O'Connell's ability to come up with different looks, right? And you mentioned a player describing how challenging that was, a corner, I forget, but that's something that I think Woolen, if he's matching up with Jefferson, is going to struggle with. And yeah, Jordan Addison's one heck of a player as well, and what a beautiful number 2 receiver to have in that offense. His ability to come up like tough catches and track the ball and just go and get it. And the Seahawks will kind of, I think that's what the Love game showed last week. Like, Woolen had been letting guys get behind him a bit, and they'd been kind of turning guys loose deep a bit. And Jordan Love will throw that ball. Like, he'll just be like, yeah, okay, fine. I've got like incredible deep accuracy. I've seen a few Viking games this year, and Sam Darnold, I mean, unbelievable story, right? But I don't think he's Jordan Love in terms of his deep ball ability and accuracy. At the same time, though, he's throwing it up there, and his guys are getting it. And heck, Jefferson and Addison are the types of guys who can go and do that. So, and I think that'll be a big part of the game, like, because the Seahawks will present those and have been presenting those opportunities for offenses. But for me, the key is like, if when this defense has struggled most often when the Seahawks have played their best football overall when they've stopped the run and played ahead of the sticks, like most defenses, right? But also they've got up to a big lead, which is sometimes been because the defense has got a pick six and then got another interception and put the offense in good field position. But like, when they're playing with a lead, they're a really good team. When it's a close game or when they're struggling early and the run game's blended in very well, and it's a very balanced offense that they're facing, full of talented players and a very good play caller, that's when they've had real issues. And that's what the Minnesota Vikings look like to me. So I am not optimistic from a Seahawks perspective here, but as a football fan, I think it's going to be so interesting to see, because it's happened to the Seahawks defense before, like in these ways. So, have they learned? Does McDonald do something different? Does he adapt and adjust his play calling balance to start off with? All these questions that will be answered, and I'm excited.
Well, and the biggest thing is probably for the Vikings, the blitzes recently have caused them some problems.
Mm-hmm.
Just the free runners adjusting protections, and Chicago didn't really do that to them. Maybe because they fired their coach that was the defensive guy. I don't know what they're doing out there. But when they played Arizona, and they have, I think, a really good defensive mind in Jonathan Gannon, he found a lot of ways to mess with Sam Darnold, to force the quarterback to make adjustments at the line of scrimmage. And I think that with Sam Darnold, he has been great across the board. But if there's one area that maybe he can be taken advantage of, we saw that specifically against Arizona, and then the following week against Atlanta too, where Atlanta doesn't really pressure people, but they found some guys. The 52-yard touchdown he threw to Jefferson that made all the highlight reels. Well, that was a free running safety at Sam Darnold, and that was why it was so spectacular. Otherwise, he would have just caught it and thrown a touchdown to Justin Jefferson from the pocket and not had to do the whole scramble thing. And I think that with Seattle, the talent that they have on defense, if you get free runners, if you get problems caused with sending blitzes and forcing an offensive line that's still adjusting to a new right guard, a new left tackle that were replaced in midseason, then there can be a little bit of, wait, who was supposed to have that? JT O'Sullivan on his videos says who's who in the zoo, which is the kind of the thing, like sorting out, wait, am I getting that guy? Was that guy responsible for the quarterback? Was that supposed to go to a hot read? Things like that, that I think for an offense that's been so good and so explosive, it still has that little bit of a missing piece. And how they deal with Justin Jefferson, this is where you can watch tape from previous games and then you'll watch a defense play and go, well, that didn't look like what they've done before, because Justin Jefferson plays for this football team. It's hard to even prepare for the Vikings because they just do different stuff to make sure that there's two bodies on him at all times. It was Sauce Gardner who talked about O'Connell playing games with the corners. And specifically what he talked about was bunch formations and late motions. So he'll have a bunch and then you'll think, okay, I got this guy, I got that guy. And then at the very last second, someone will shift positions and then get to the top of their routes. And they're like, who's going where? And how do we sort that out? Like, what O'Connell knows how to do is understand what the defense's assignments are and say to them, what are you going to do about this? Like, I know how you're going to play it, so we're going to make the adjustment to play toward the way that you play, if that makes sense.
Right. No, totally. And like, that's exactly what I was kind of thinking with the bunch stuff and the condensed stuff. Like in my mind, I have the Jefferson touchdown against Atlanta, where not only is he from a bunch set, but he does that kind of motion to stress them. So basically, what O'Connell got for him was a head start, right? Because he gets a running start, a clean release, and a two-way go, where because he's got a cut split, he can go corner or post, and he ran like an in cut, and it's a touchdown. And he got him like purely one-on-one as well, because he threw something at the post safety. A different type of route before Jefferson's broke in. So yeah, that's the type of stuff that I think Woolen has is very talented mover for his size, but like he's still long-legged, and that's really difficult to deal with. In terms of the blitzing, I don't think McDonald does blitz, obviously, but like he actually really likes trying to get pressure with four guys. Now he can simulate pressure, obviously, send a second level guy, but drop a first level guy, so you're still rushing four, but it looks like a blitz. He will use cover zero, more kind of as a run stopping call. But then also like in those clear passing downs, that's when he'll get into his bag and do like the really creative blitzing stuff. But yeah, I think the Packers game, there's a few pressures, but because they couldn't stop the run, they didn't want to get too like wacky. And I would like to see some more run focused blitzing, as a countermeasure. But yeah, it's I'm repeating myself. It's going to be a really good matchup. Devon Witherspoon's obviously a standout player for the Seahawks. He's electric, and he a lot of his best stuff this year has not gone unseen, but it doesn't show up in a box score. But like, he's a very savvy player who can play in the slot and is really good at like underneath zone coverage and stuff, and has really good feel and instincts and just inherent like playmaking in his brain. But also, can play outside and match up with guys and blitz as well, which he's a fun player. And then Julian Love he received an All-Pro vote last year, which is kind of crazy, really, but good for him. He had a pick six in prime time against an East Coast team, so that's probably part of it. But he's been a very good safety in terms of open field tackling, second level stuff, and the edge group is very talented, as you mentioned, with former Gopher boy Mafe kind of being the star. But Derek Hall as well has been he's a very kind of like bend through contact guy. Uchenna Nwoshi's just come back from injury, and he before he got injured the first time in 2023 was like the star of the Seahawks defense when they had a good run defense, and him going down kind of killed their whole there was knock-on effects on that which were not good, but he can make real splash plays against the run. So it's a very talented D-line. Ernest Jones is playing great football at inside backer. Tyrese Knight is a guy. If you see like the Vikings run to the short side of the field a lot, or run to the weak side, that would probably be because Knight, as a rookie, everything's going really fast for him. and his eyes sometimes are in the wrong spot for a second, or not even a second, like a moment. But in the NFL, if that happens as a linebacker, you're done, you're toast. So he's a guy who I've felt watching tape back. Each week, offenses try and go at him, particularly in their opening 15 plays that we spoke about. That the designer stuff for that upcoming opponent. So yeah, might see Aaron Jones running downhill at him.
Well, I agree with you completely that this is a fascinating matchup, and it is not one that the Vikings should be taken lightly, though, because even if there might be a coaching advantage from one offensive play caller to the other, this is a Seattle team that is in a fight to win that division for a reason. A lot of talent on this roster, and I also think it is a not great matchup for the talent that they have. When opposing teams have brought in great wide receivers or veteran quarterbacks or pass rushers, blitz packages, corners who can cover, it makes it a lot more difficult on this Vikings team. And they haven't seen as complete of a roster as they're going to see against Seattle. So last thing, who do you think wins the football game?
Well, the Seahawks do have a good record against Minnesota, don't they? But I do think it's different teams. They, as you said, it's a very important game for Minnesota, isn't it, as well? But I think I do think the Seahawks lose this, but it's also one just killer analysis. It's also one I wouldn't be shocked if they do. Actually, no, I would be shocked if they win. I have not seen anything really from the offense is very uninspiring, and I don't see them magically turning a corner with how well the Vikings play and just their style of play on that side of the ball. So yeah, but like for Seattle, like the magnitude of this one is like if they lose this, there's all sorts of bad tiebreakers because they lost to the Giants, like an NFC opponent. There's all sorts of horrid tiebreakers that are going to come in, and they may well miss the playoffs. They also have to play the Rams in Week 18. I think Week 18 is loads of divisional matchups, isn't it? But anyway, playing the Rams then, who are like vying for the top spot in the NFC West, like you can't really drop any games now. And yeah, so we'll see how this one goes.
This is the most that I've been leaning toward the other team against the Vikings in quite some time because the desperation of Seattle, the home field advantage, which I think is still real, but maybe not.
No. Oh, we should talk about that.
All right,
okay. That's a whole thing for that's a whole thing for like people obviously who watching the Seahawks, but that's been a massive topic in Seattle of how. I mean, I've noticed it for perhaps a couple of years, but this year, like every single opposing fan base has like it's looked on television like 50-50 split
wow,
of fans.
Really?
And particularly if a team gets up like early, like you heard "Go Pack Go," and the Packers fans travel well, right? But you heard "Go Pack Go" after the first drive, and the Packers and Chris Collinsworth having to talk about Seattle needing to go maybe to a silent count at home at Lumen Field. So yeah, the whole the 12s thing that they might need to review their ticketing policy on season ticket holders selling tickets to opposing fan bases. But that's something DK Metcalf like straight up said in his press conference this week about noticing that there's opposition fans, like a lot of them. The 49ers did it. I mean, Minnesota fans travel well, right?
Very. Yep. Very.
There you go. You could get a Skol in Lumen Field. That would be a Viking. What do you call it? Viking clap, Viking chant.
Yeah, chant, clap, whatever.
Skol.
That's How about that? I mean, I did hear the "Go Pack Go," but I kind of expect that just because Green Bay fans are everywhere because of Brett Favre. But you're right though that Vikings fans do travel extremely well. Last year they loaded up like Cincinnati to see Nick Mullins and Jake Browning. That was
hell yeah.
That to me was the most impressive feat of Vikings fans, taking over a stadium in Cincinnati for Mullins v. Jake Browning. This one's got a little more juice than that. So, okay, well, I guess maybe the home field advantage isn't as significant. The short week for the Vikings coming off Monday Night Football, and they've won 7 in a row. It's really hard to win 8 in a row when you're playing good teams. But I think it's just a great football matchup, and we'll see how it plays out. But your analysis also great Matty F Brown. You can find him over at Seattle Overload, Seahawks on Tape on Substack, and one of my go-to people to understand what is going on in the Pacific Northwest. Great stuff, man. It was great to have you on the show. I'm glad we could do this in podcast form for the very first time, and enjoy the football game. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. I enjoyed it. I'm excited for the game now. I want it to be tomorrow, but a few more days.
By the time people listen to this, it'll be the game. So, all right. Well, everybody, thanks for your time as always, for watching and listening, and we'll catch you later. Football.